When you hear the word church, what comes to mind for you? Okay, when you hear somebody talking about it or you think about it, what's the first thing that pops in your head? For some of you, it may be you think of people who you know love you and care about you, and they're there to encourage you and support you. On the other hand, for some of you, you may think of people who hurt you. You may think in some cases of people that you feel like hate you because of some experiences you've had and things that you've done. Some of you may think of a religious institution that failed you in some way. For a lot of people, I think, maybe this is many of us, for a lot of people, when you think of church, you just immediately think of a location, don't you? You think of a building, a place, a brick and mortar. That's all it is to you. It's just brick and mortar. The thing about living in America, it doesn't matter whether you grew up in church or not. Everybody's got a perception of church. I don't think you can live in this country because of how church is ingrained into the fabric of who we are as a country. It's just always been a part of our existence. You can't live in America and not have some perception of church. The question is, and this is why it's so important, the perception you have of church often influences or impacts the perception you have of God, which is why you got to pay attention to make sure you're thinking of church in the right way. Now, it's not going to surprise you at all that, I love our church. I was part of helping start it. I'm giving my life to it. But the thing that may be surprising to some of you is the whole reason we started this church is because we actually didn't love what church had become. That's why we started it to begin with. That's the thing that was driving us. If you are somebody who grew up and at some point along the way you've had a bad experience with church, you've been hurt, or you think of church and you immediately think of people who are judgmental and hypocritical, if that's your experience, I totally get that. We had seen that. Some of us had experienced that, which is why when we decided to start a church, we thought, let's see if we can start a different kind of church than those experiences we've had. Let's see if we can start a better kind of church, if you will, a better one that is for everyone, that literally anybody can walk in and they can have a great experience and they can feel like they belong before they believe. Because we hadn't always experienced that. Some of you have not always experienced that. And we knew how we thought about church was going to have an impact on how we viewed God. Today we're starting a brand new 2-part series we're calling Your Move, Your Movement. And I'm going to tell you up front what the agenda for this series is, okay? I'm not hiding anything. My agenda for the next 2 weeks is simply this. I want to help all of you who think of this church, because you come here, but you think of this church as their church. You know what I'm talking about? I'm in conversations with some of you sometimes. This is not criticism, it's just reality. I'm in a conversation with you, and you'll start talking about this church that you come to, but you'll refer to it as their church, or you're talking to me and you'll say your church, like it's my church. I'm like, it's not my church. I thought it was us. Apparently it's not us. So anyway, I get that. I totally understand that. That's a perception thing, right? So there are a lot of you who think of it that way, and that's fine. But my agenda for the next 2 weeks is to help you move from thinking of it as their church to our church. Or you would say my church. You would say, I love my church. Or you would say, I love being a part of what our church is doing. That is a really, really important shift. And the reason I want to talk about for 2 weeks is because when this happens, church becomes more personal to you, but your Heavenly Father also begins to become more personal to you. This is, by the way, just to connect some dots for you, this is why every single week I get up and I'm like, hey, whether it's your first time or maybe you've been here a while, but if you've never let us know you're here, I would love for you to come to the suite. I say the same thing every single week. Some of you are like, well, why is he always talking about that? Well, because until you let us know you're here, here's what I know. This church is not going to feel super personal to you. You're going to keep saying their church, their church, their church. But the minute you let us know you're here, we can be a guide. The minute you let us know you're here, we can just walk alongside you and help you get to the point where it feels personal, where it becomes your church. And you start talking about our church. And that is a significant shift for several reasons I want to talk about today. But one of them is this. You probably don't realize that you have a very unique invitation to be a part of something in this world that none of us would have dreamt on our own that we would ever be invited to be a part of. You actually have a unique invitation to be the fulfillment of a prediction that Jesus made 2,000 years ago. A prediction that when he made it, I'm telling you, nobody was putting any money on it. There was no betting for this to happen because this was outlandish. Nobody expected it to happen. But you are actually part of that prediction. And you have been invited into something that's actually quite extraordinary when you stop and you think about it. So I want to give you a little context for why Jesus said what he said and why he made this prediction. The year was AD 32, about a year before Jesus' death and resurrection. He and his 12 disciples, Matthew, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Thomas, all those guys, they are not in Israel at the time, which is where they spent most of their time around Jewish people. But Jesus has led them out of what's comfortable for them, out of the area they're most known to be most comfortable in, most known to be around. And instead, he's taken them to a city called Caesarea Philippi. This was a Greek/Roman city. It had influences of both. It was named after Caesar Augustus and King Philip II. That's how they came up with the name. And Caesarea Philippi was a microcosm of how the entire first century world tended to think about God and all the confusion they had about who God was and what he was like. And I say that because if you'd gone into Caesarea Philippi, you would have seen 14 different temples that were all built and constructed for 14 different Greek and Roman gods. It was like, we don't know who's in charge, and we don't know what we have to do to make somebody happy, to make sure life goes better. So we're just, we're hedging our bets, and we're trying to cover 14 different supposed gods. We're gonna do what we can to keep them all happy. So Jesus, think about this, is taking his 12 Jewish friends, and they have marched out of what's comfortable and familiar to them, and they have gone into Caesarea Philippi with all of this Greek and Roman influence. And right there in the shadow of those temples, Jesus looks at them and he asks them a question. He says, who do people say the Son of Man, referring to himself, the Son of Man is? He's going, okay, everybody knows who Zeus is and Hermes and Pan and on and on. People get that. But what are people saying about me? Who do people think I am? What's the word on the street? And his buddies look back at him and they say, well, this is what we hear. Some say you're John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. Still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. These are all important religious figures in the nation of Israel. So they're going, people don't exactly know who you are, but everybody's come to the conclusion that you're going to be a prominent, important religious figure in the history of our nation. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He then turns and he makes it personal. He looks back at him and he says, well, what about you? Who do you say I am? And if you'd been there and he'd asked you that question, how would you answer? What would you say? I think the guys are a little stumped. They're probably looking at each other like, well, we've been trying to figure that out. And we spent a lot of time with Jesus. They'd seen him do a lot of different things that were extraordinary. But now Jesus has turned the tables. And to our knowledge, this is the first time he's ever asked them this question. They got to figure out how to answer. And Peter, who, if you don't know much about Jesus' life in the New Testament, Peter's a guy who always had an answer. It was 99% of the time wrong, but he always had an answer, okay? Always had an opinion. I always joke, I've got an opinion. It's probably not right, but I got one if you want to know. Well, that was Peter, all right? He always had an opinion. So Peter finally just speaks up on behalf of the group. He looks back at Jesus and he says, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's who we think you are. Now, they would come to doubt that later and give up on that later until the resurrection. That's another story. At this point, Peter says, okay, this is who we think you are. Which, by the way, you guys came out on a nasty day when most other people didn't come out, so I'm going to give you a little bonus info, okay? When he says you are the Messiah, there's another word for Messiah. It's the word Christ. So whenever you hear somebody say Jesus Christ, what they're actually saying is Jesus Messiah. Now, I'm telling you that because some of you thought Christ was his last name. Like, Mr. Christ, table for two's ready. That's not it, okay? It wasn't Joseph and Mary Christ and his son Jesus, okay? That's not how it works. So it was a descriptive term, so now you know, all right? Jesus, Messiah, or Jesus Christ. And Peter's going, this was really significant for a Jewish person to say. Peter's going, we think you are the long-awaited Messiah we have been hoping for centuries. We think, this is what Peter's saying, we think you are God in human flesh. And when Peter says this, I'm kind of reading into the story just a little, but I'm pretty sure Jesus just started laughing. And with a big smile on his face, he looked back at Peter and he said this, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. Now I'm going to translate that for you. Jesus looked back at Peter and said, oh my gosh, you finally got one right. It's a miracle. Had to have been some divine assistance in this because you always get it wrong. But Peter, this time you're right. And I think everybody was just chuckling, everybody's laughing like, thank goodness we finally got one. And then And then Jesus makes this prediction, a prediction that the odds of it happening were so long nobody would have ever expected it. He looks at Peter and his other friends, and he says, and I tell you, you're Peter, and on this rock referring to, on this declaration or truth you just shared about my identity. So on my identity, on the truth of who I am, I will build my church. Now, I can pretty much guarantee that what you think of when you think of church, for most of us, is not what Jesus was thinking of when he said church. Technically, he didn't say church. He was probably speaking in Greek, and he used the Greek word ekklesia, okay? Now, ekklesia was not a religious term at all. It was just an everyday common Greek term that meant an assembly, a gathering, or a movement of people. So imagine this. 12 guys and Jesus in the shadow of those temples in Caesarea Philippi. And Jesus looks at them and says, on the truth of who I am, around my identity, I will build my movement. What are the odds that any movement is going to come from that? If you don't know much about Jesus' friends, let me tell you just a little bit real quickly. One of them ends up betraying him. 10 of them all abandon him when he's arrested, and they don't go to even watch him die. This is not the kind of, group that you're going to build some big movement off of. But Jesus looks at him and says, yeah, around this truth that you just said, Peter, around my identity and upon who I am, I will build my movement, and the gates of Hades, which is how first century people referred to death, the gates of Hades, or death itself, will not overcome this movement. I'm telling you, when Jesus said this, I think his buddies were looking at each other like, are you kidding me? What is he talking about? We have zero momentum now. There's no chance of a movement. Jesus, your last few teachings have driven more people away than they've drawn in. And the word on the street at the time is, as soon as you set foot in Jerusalem, they're going to arrest you and kill you. I mean, there's no movement happening here. Nobody would have put money on this. But 2,000 years later, and there are people united all around the world around this simple idea that Jesus was God in human flesh. That he came to communicate and to demonstrate for us who God is and what he's like. And he died and rose again, so we could be forgiven for our sins and have a relationship with him. How in the world does that happen? How do you explain that away? The odds were so long. But it's true today. And you're here because you're part of this prediction. You're part of the outcome. Jesus was talking about you when he said this. This is why from the very beginning, when we started our church coming up on 20 years ago, that's why from the very beginning we had a very simple goal. Our goal was this: we're going to be a movement. We are not going to be a meeting place. Meeting place is how most everybody thinks about church, but that is not what Jesus intended. So we're going to be a movement and not a meeting place. This is such a significant distinction. Let me see if I can explain it this way. A meeting place is full of consumers. A meeting place is full of people who are going, okay, this is going to be about me. And that's not a bad thing. That is the whole purpose of a meeting place. I'll give you some examples. Every time you go to Walmart, Walmart is a meeting place. Can you go to Walmart without seeing somebody you know? Of course not, okay? Walmart is always a gathering and assembly of people. It is a meeting place, all right? That's what it is. You got a bunch of people there. But when you go to Walmart, you know what you are? You're a consumer. Well, it's designed to be that way. That's how it's supposed to work. Every time you go watch a racer athletic event, that is a meeting place, okay? But you're a consumer. You showed up to be entertained by college students who have athletic ability you've only dreamed of having, okay? That's what you're doing. You are a consumer. You're there to be entertained. When you go to a movie theater, that is a meeting place. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. You're there to be entertained. Your identity is as a consumer in all of those settings. And again, that's the whole purpose of it. But the thing you have to understand is meeting places are designed around you. Meeting places are focused on, okay, if they come here, what's in it for them? What's in it for you? Meeting places are designed to make you takers and spectators. That's what they're designed to make us. It's all right, that's their purpose. But a movement, now movement's very different. A movement isn't full of consumers. A movement is filled with contributors. Every great movement, just think about our nation's history. Every great movement that's ever happened in our nation that's made a significant difference has been full of people who were contributors. They were not consumers. They weren't looking to see what they could get out of it for themselves. They were looking to make a difference for other people and to make an impact and a contribution in their community or in our nation. This is exactly what Jesus had in mind when he said, I'm going to build my movement, and death itself is not going to overcome it. He was saying, I'm going to build a movement of people with a common mission and a compelling message, with a mission to make it simple for people to connect with God, and with the simple message that you're invited to experience God's forgiveness and be a part of his family. It's all possible through my death and resurrection. That's what Jesus had in mind from the very beginning. See, movements create contributors who are givers and participators. Meeting places create consumers who are takers and spectators. So here's the question I want to ask you, and this is the question that I hope this week you can't escape, that it'll just stick with you, and you'll be forced to wrestle with this and how you would answer it personally. Are you treating this like a movement or a meeting place? Are you treating this like a movement or a meeting place? Are you a spectator or a participator? Are you a consumer or a contributor? A taker or a giver? It is really easy to fall into the routine of treating this like a meeting place, because quite honestly, that's how most people think of church. It is a category on my calendar on Sunday, and so I just do it because I think it's helpful, or I do it to keep, so-and-so happy, you know what I'm talking about, whoever you live with. I'm doing it to make sure they stay happy, so I just show up when I can. Or, hey, I'm gonna show up whenever things get bad enough. It's a place I go, and I know I'm gonna get some encouragement, some hope. I'll feel a little better when I leave. We just think of this quite honestly. It's just so easy. It's a meeting place. It's just where I go to kind of go through the motions and do the deal, and I'm checking the box. I think it somehow makes me feel like I'm better with God, or in better shape with God if I show up. So we got all our reasons for doing it, but that's all a meeting place mindset. A movement mindset is very different. A movement mindset is, oh no, I am part of something that's making a significant impact. I'm part of something where a group of us have a compelling message and mission that everybody needs to know. And my job is to invest in, participate in, and help spread that. Two totally different mindsets. So which one do you have? And if you're thinking, I think I have a meeting place mindset, I'm not even sure how to change that. Well, we talk about 4 what I would call starter habits. This isn't all there is to it, but 4 starter habits. You know what people in movements do? They invite, serve, give, and connect. That's what people in movements do. You find somebody who's part of a movement they are passionate about, they can't help but tell you about it. They can't help but invite you to be a part of it. They can't help but serve. They're not in it for what they can get out of it. They feel like they're making a difference in the world, and so they're there to serve other people and help them. They invest and give. They're generous with it because they think it's such a big deal that it makes such a big difference. They're willing to do whatever it takes to help it spread and move further and faster. And they connect with other people who care about the same thing they care about. In our case, we have an opportunity to connect with a God who's reminding us how much he cares about us, so we can then connect with other people and show them how much he cares about them. This is what it takes. This is why, by the way, just quick aside, this is why, by the way, every single month, a couple times a month, we do this thing called What's Next. Because when you come here and you're like, okay, I don't know how to get more involved or how to get more engaged. I'm not sure what it looks like, to be a part of this. We just try to show you how we think about this movement and what's next. It's why we offer it all the time, to give you a glimpse to figure out what your next step could be. So, which way do you think about this? I mean, we're starting the year. I think it's a good time to ask the question. You think of this like a meeting place, you think of this more like a movement. Which way do you treat your church? Now, here's the deal, okay? If you tend to think of it like a meeting place, there is nothing I just said that's going to convince you to change your mind. And I am fully aware of that, just so you know, okay? So, before we wrap up, I want to explain to you why it is in your best interest to treat this like a movement and not a meeting place. This is not a trap, so I need you to participate, all right? How many of you have ever been on a cruise? Let me see your hands. Oh, yeah, good number of you, okay? You know, I love cruises. I've only been on 3 or 4 of them, but they're awesome. You know why you love cruises so much? I'm going to tell you. It's all about you. It's why you love cruises. It's why I love cruises. You don't have to carry your luggage. They take it to your room for you. Somebody's cleaning your room, making your bed, and putting chocolate on your pillow every night. What's that about? That doesn't happen anywhere else in life, does it? So you love that. The thing about cruise, once you get on there, you don't have to make any serious decisions. I mean, you got to figure out which kind of food you want that night, but that's about it. There's food everywhere. If you get hungry at midnight, don't worry, the buffet's open. Just go eat, It's all perfectly fine. They have so much entertainment for you. If you want a comedy show, there it is. If you want to go watch a Broadway-style play, there it is. You want to go watch a movie, it's there. You want to lay out by the pool, lay out by the pool. If you want to do some other things that cause you to lose money that I'm not going to mention from the stage, there's a place for that, right? So it's all there. It's all there. You got everything. My favorite part about a cruise ship, by the way, just so you know, my favorite part's the ice cream machine. If y'all don't hit that up, you have wasted your money when you go on a cruise, because it's all free. Well, technically you paid for it, but it's all you can eat. So you know what I do? Every time I walk by it, it's just a rule. I'm going to double fist 2 ice cream cones every single time. Now, here's the tip. If you want to try this, always make sure I eat one of them completely before I get back to my wife, and then I'm not in as much trouble. That's the way that works. But you can just have whatever you want. When you go on a cruise, there are, 1,500 or more staff whose entire focus is on making sure you are happy. It is amazing. It's amazing. It's a great vacation. But here's a question I want to ask you. When you get off a cruise, what do you leave with? Okay? What do you leave with? Number 1, you leave with added pounds. It's the first thing, all right? Nobody, if you've never gone on a cruise, go on one, and then don't weigh yourself for 3 months. That'll be helpful for you. Because a cruise is a great vacation, but it's not a healthy vacation, is it? You're going to gain weight on a cruise ship if you've done it right. That's the whole point. So you leave with added pounds, but you leave with a little meaning. I want you to think about this. Have you ever walked off a cruise ship and thought to yourself, that week gave me such a deeper sense of meaning, purpose, significance, and fulfillment. I think I know what I want to do with my life now. Some of you have thought, I think I want to live on a cruise ship the rest of my life. You have thought that, but you know what that would do? It would kill you. You'd gain so much weight, they'd have to roll you down the gangplank eventually. It's a great vacation. It's a horrible lifestyle. You understand that. You get that. Listen, some of you, some of us, maybe a lot of us, are treating this church like it's a cruise ship. And it's not spiritually healthy for you. And this is why I push you to get engaged. Not because it benefits me in some way, because it's not spiritually healthy for you. It's not going to be what's in your best interest long term. It will never lead you to a deeper sense of meaning, purpose, significance, and fulfillment. It just won't. And so, I wouldn't be doing my job if I said, oh, they're sitting there at the buffet. Every week they come and sit down at the buffet. It's just let them keep eating, let them keep eating. You're going to kill yourself spiritually. That's not the way to live. It's not the way to follow Jesus. And Jesus didn't say, I'm going to build my cruise ship and it's going to be amazing. That's not what he was about. So if you're somebody who's not a church person, and it's so uncomfortable for you to walk into a church, we totally get that. And my job is to do everything in my power to make those of you who are uncomfortable comfortable. But my job is also to take all of you Jesus followers who call this your church and you're so comfortable because you're treating it like a cruise ship, my job is to make you uncomfortable because you can't grow in your comfort zone. It's just not healthy for you spiritually. And if you keep treating this like a meeting place, if you keep treating it like a cruise ship, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're going to kill the movement. The very thing about this church that you love so much and caused you to want to come here, you will kill. You will. Because this is really profound. You're probably going to want to write this down. I'm about to prove how smart I am, okay? You ready? Because movements are made of people who move. That's how it works, isn't it? No movement's ever been made of people who sat still by the pool and watched a movie. Movements are made of people who move, who do something, who engage, who care deeply enough that they're going to invest themselves in it. Some of you talk to me as if you love our church. It's not your church. You love our church. And you love everything that makes our church unique or distinct. You love the fact it's a movement. And you fail to recognize that you are now part of this. And listen, the more of us that choose to treat it like a meeting place, the faster we kill the very movement that attracted us to begin with. So, if you call Journey your church in 2025, you have a decision to make. You going to treat it like a meeting place, or are you going to treat it like a movement? If you choose meeting place, I want to tell you two things. Number one, here's the good news. We're still going to love you. We're still going to serve you just like we would anybody else. It's perfectly fine. Number two is the bad news. You're going to get really frustrated with me because I'm not going to let you stay comfortable. I'm going to be pushing you all the time because it's the loving thing to do. Nobody lives on a cruise ship and gets healthier. Nobody treats church like a meeting place and gets healthier spiritually. You actually want this to be a movement. Even if you don't want to contribute to it, you want to be a movement. And you know how I know that? There are roughly 144,000 people in the counties where we live who are not in church on any given Sunday. That number doesn't mean a lot to most of you. That, I'm certain, doesn't move you emotionally. But you know what does move you emotionally? When one of those 144,000 is your son or your daughter, your mom or your dad, your brother or your sister, your coworker, your classmate, your roommate, your friend. And they look at you and say, I think I want to come to church with you on Sunday. All of a sudden, you get very invested in it. And I know you get very invested in it because a bunch of you send me text when that happens. And you're like, I'm so excited. So-and-so decided they were going to come to church. I've been trying to get them forever. They're coming. And the general thread of the entire text is, don't screw it up, Matt. That's the general thread, okay? And I get that. I totally understand that. You're like, I know the band's always amazing. You don't deliver most weeks, so I need you to deliver this week. That's kind of the thread, and that's great. I love when I get those. I love how excited you are about it. But it just became personal to you because it was somebody that you love, that you care about, that you know. And here's what I know about you. When you bring them on that Sunday, you do not want them to experience a meeting place. You're hoping everybody who is engaged here makes it feel like a movement of people who are for your friend, care about them, love them, and accept them. You want us to do everything to the best of our ability to make it simple for them to feel comfortable and at home, but also simple for them to understand how to connect with God. All of a sudden, you're dying to make sure they experience a movement when they show up. And you should. That's the way it ought to be. But I'm telling you, if you call this your church and you keep treating it like a meeting place, you slow us down. You make it harder for them to experience a movement because we are the church. It's not me. I have very little influence in what they experience. It's you. So you make the call. It's your move. And it's your movement. So how are you going to treat it this year? What are you going to do? Keep going through the motions with a meeting place mindset? You can do that. But it'll hurt us. I don't know of another church around here who God has given more opportunities and invitations to partner with him in what he's doing in the world. And over the course of this year, I'm going to share more of that with you. Some of it you don't even know yet. But we have more opportunity that God has given us than we have the ability to step in and meet. Because we don't have enough people yet who see this as a movement. So you can keep treating it like a meeting place, but you will limit our ability to do what God's inviting us to do. Or you can decide to begin to engage and to be part of a movement. And when you do, absolutely, God's going to use you to make an impact in other people's lives in ways you never thought was possible. But God's also going to become more personal to you. Things are going to become more meaningful to you. You're going to discover a deeper purpose than you've discovered in your life before. And you're going to grow more in your relationship with Jesus than you ever have. Because you were not invited by Jesus to show up at a meeting place, check a box, and leave every week. You're invited to be a part of a movement. You're invited to partner with him in what he's doing in our communities and in the world. So, it's your move, because it's your movement. It's up to you to decide what to do. Let me pray for us. Father, first of all, we should just pause and say thank you to you because what you have done here, the opportunities you have brought, the potential you have given us, the things you've allowed us to already experience as a church are far beyond what we deserve. So we're grateful for that. But just like anybody, it's really easy for us to slip into treating this like a meeting place instead of the movement you intended, Jesus. So would you help us not to be able to escape that nagging sense of maybe we're not as engaged as we should be? Would you continue to just stir inside of us a sense that we're missing something until we partner with you and engage with your movement? And would you use us to do what you have created and called us to do, and in the process, help us to know you more personally? And it's in your name we pray. Amen.